Welcome to Terror in Tandem, a podcast about finding entertainment in the macabre. Hosted by the knowledgeable and lovable Laura and Richard Mathiasen. Each episode, we discuss the horror genre, from books to film to TV and beyond. Sometimes, even from that old beyond. You can find us online at terrorintandem.com and on Instagram at terrorintandem.
Welcome, hey!
Hello.
A new installment of your favorite terror
My
episodes.
favorite, everyone's favorite.
I was talking to the audience.
Oh, with an apostrophe. Nope.
My brain just broke.
We're starting over. Yes, okay, yes. All right.
We're never starting over.
We're not.
Just let's keep going.
Grammatically perfect, always. We don't always speak good words good, right?
Right.
Yeah. And on a podcast, who cares? It's not like that's important.
Anyway,
Welcome
your
to
favorite
Bearer
terror
in
team.
Blandum.
Your favorite terror team is here.
Hello.
You are favorite terror team.
You all is team. So congratulations on listening to us. You have landed on a good one. We are going to talk today about a subject that is near and dear to our hearts.
It's not fucking goddamn bullshit, that's for sure.
You're not going to find that in what we're talking about today, which is PG-13 horror.
Yeah.
Now,
take out your titties. It's PG-13 time.
absolutely.
I apologize to our younger listeners.
We get
I don't know if we have any listeners of any age.
No,
so.
Actually, we trend heavily in the 75 plus demographic. I want to talk first.
Well, we're going to do horror of the PG-13 variety today.
Yeah, it doesn't mean we have to be PG-13.
No, we aren't PG-13. This is an explicit
I know I had to put that.
podcast.
I specifically had to put that rating on it after listening to our first few episodes and being like, oh, yeah.
Well, you swear all the time.
I do.
You're a trash mouth with bad grammar.
All
but
of these things are true.
What's really interesting is you're going to think that, oh, well, I don't need to listen or I don't need to watch PG-13 horror. I want the real scares. But we're going to tell you right now, you'll find them.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because I did want to address that. I feel...
Well, good. This is the right episode for that.
I feel a similar... I would say I used to feel a similar reflexive action of like... PG-13, it's lesser. It's not going to be as scary.
We have this recorded in a podcast of where you're like, oh, PG-13? Well, I'm not feeling too confident about it. It's going to be scary.
Well, here's the thing. I feel kind of the same way about PG-13 as I do about a super gory R-rated or unrated movie. It just needs to serve the story. It needs to serve the narrative. If the narrative is best told, if the scares are best delivered through suggestion or withholding or, something like atmospheric and, without the need for blood, violence, things like that. If it's going to be a scarier movie that way than showing somebody in a rubber mask getting sprayed with Technicolor orange blood, then do it that way.
Yeah. And I think what your capital, apostrophe RE's host is saying here is that you can be afraid at any age.
That's the other thing is it corrupts the young, and that is always important.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, like, these are the precious, wonderful movies that you can kind of sneak past your parents.
And also,
maybe.
if you listen to our initial episode of What Scares Us, it all comes from being
Absolutely.
young, and the fears that you were afraid of when you were in your room at night.
No, listen, want to stress that we love horror movies, and this love started when we were kids.
Yeah.
And it's through stuff like this, PG-13 movies. But before we talk about like specific stuff, do you want to give a little or talk a little bit about the background of PG-13 itself? Because of the ratings, it is the newest, I think.
Yeah,
or one
you
of the
could
newer
get into
ones.
the specificity of it, but I'll say for the majority of, film's history, movie ratings were like a suggestion, not really a guideline, not really a strict guideline.
Yeah, I mean, for many decades, most movies were governed by the like moral commission or the Catholic commission. So, they were pretty much all safe until about in the 60s.
Yeah, well, once the parental guidance revolution really blew up in the 80s.
Save the children.
The difference between G, PG, and PG-13 could be extreme gore, decapitations, or even explicit sex scenes. And it's commonly accepted that
or all
PG-13
three at the same time.
It's commonly accepted that PG-13 ratings resulted from the studio's attempt to get more viewers and not handicapping their film with an R rating because PG-13, they didn't want to be associated with kid movies, like the G-rated kid movies.
Yeah.
But they also didn't want to alienate a whole bunch of possible viewers, by giving it an R rating.
See,
so they're sort of like working around that.
That's the problem I have with some PG-13 horror movies. Like, if a movie was always supposed to be that way, great. Like I said, serves the narrative. But if it's something that's been, was an R-rated movie that's been cut down by the studio to potentially make more money, like M3gan, I find that disappointing. Like, I want to see what the story originally was. Now,
it's me, Thregan.
In M3gan's defense, they did release the R-rated version on streaming at the same time that they dropped the PG-13. And yes, by giving it a PG-13 rating, it probably did make a lot more money than it would have. Maybe. I don't know. After Deadpool proved that R-rated movies can make $1 billion too, and things like that, who's to say? But I'm saying, like, if you're cutting your movie down, not for creative purposes, but for, like, to get butts in seats, I don't know.
I guess we'll never know who does that, but you want to talk a little bit about how the rating system came to be?
Well, yeah, it's actually kind of wild. So you can thank basically one person for this, and that person is Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
So in a wild, basically month-long period in 1984, talking late May, early June, 2 movies came out, both rated PG.
Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and Gremlins?
Both of those movies, yes. Both rated PG. Now, Temple of Doom, PG. I'm going to go ahead and say I agree that there is definitely, at this point, obviously a huge gulf between PG and R. So anyway, both of these movies come out, and parents go crazy. Now, this is, of course, we're getting into the second term of Reagan, or, close to. So America is on a definite save the children moral panic kick, and parents went nuts. And Spielberg himself was very upset about this. Having directed Temple of Doom and produced Gremlins, he called then president of the MPAA, Jack Valenti, and suggested, hey, maybe we need to, like, come up with something in between PG and R, so parents stop sending me fucking death threats. Yeah, so just to mention, Jaws is technically rated PG.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, I guess Quint getting bitten in half didn't constitute. I mean, there was straight up nudity in that movie as well.
Yeah.
But so standards have changed over the years. And I will say that I think there was, now that more filmmaking is sort of allowed or tolerated, or there's more diversity in filmmaking, there was a pretty big gulf between PG and R. Mm-hmm. So therein lies PG-13, but that doesn't mean a movie can't scare the poop out of you.
Right. Yeah. You don't need, I think PG-13 proved that you don't need blood and guts to be scary, and the monster that is implied is sometimes scarier than the one that is seen.
Absolutely. It's like reading a book compared to the movie. Sometimes the book is better because what you thought of in your mind was scarier than what the filmmakers came up with.
Yeah, I will say for like a sense of fear, if those of you who are drawn to M. Night Shyamalan movies, most of his movies are PG-13.
Oh yeah,
The Sixth Sense, Signs, Split.
except for his very, very best movie, The Happening, widely considered the best acted.
This is
What?
not. You shouldn't put that on tape. And Gremlins 1 and 2, as we previously mentioned, is also PG-13.
Yeah. So the first movie to be released under that rating. So I just want to stress that all of this happened in a month, because by July 1st of that year, now we're talking, Gremlins and Temple of Doom come out in May and June of 1984. By July 1st, the PG-13 rating had been created, implemented, and the first movie to receive it was Red Dawn. Now, some movies have retroactively been reclassified as PG-13, one of the most famous examples being The Birds, which came out in 1963, and Poltergeist came out in 1982.
Well, since we're talking about Poltergeist, that's my first on my list.
You want to just launch right into it?
I'm going to launch right into it.
Like a plate flying across a room?
Yeah, so one of my favorite PG-13 films, and one that I think holds up to all of the horror scares that you expect from a good horror movie, is Poltergeist, from director Tobe Hooper, who we've talked about
maybe once or twice. Yeah. Definitely he's like the forgotten of the greats. Everyone knows Wes Craven, John Carpenter of that era. R.I.P. William Friedkin. But Tobe Hooper, I feel like was sort of always flew a little under the radar.
It was produced and written by Steven Spielberg, King PG-13 himself.
Yeah.
So just for those of you who have no idea what this movie is about, strange happenings with a family that lives in California when their house is taken over by supernatural beings. It's like a dark and terrifying psychological horror. And Diane is played by Jo Beth Williams. She's the mother.
Hell yes.
The father is Stephen, played by Craig T. Nelson.
Mr. Incredible himself.
And there are 3 kids. Dana, played by Dominique Dunn. Bobby, played by Oliver Robbins. And 6-year-old Carol Ann, played by Heather O'Rourke.
R.I.P. Heather.
So they move into this home. Carol Ann starts to get.
You forgot Zelda Rubinstein, by the way.
I didn't forget her.
Okay.
Carol Ann starts to be fascinated, aka sort of drawn in by these spirits via their television set, and there's no sexuality, although I might argue that a little bit, because there is a scene when they're smoking that joint in the bedroom. Yeah,
and Jo Beth Williams is wearing panties and a t-shirt,
and she's sucked to the ceiling.
Yeah, it's classic. Watching that, it's classic boomer parents, because they're super strict and punitive with their kids, but then they close the door, roll up a joint, and they're just reliving their college days.
There's very little cursing, and no one dies in this movie.
Well, except unless they started out that way.
There is a lot of tragedy surrounding the film itself, outside of the actual in-film. Outside of the film, Heather O'Rourke died tragically. Yeah,
she died, I think, either right before or quite soon after the release of Poltergeist 3.
And Dominique Dunn, she was strangled to death by her estranged lover. She was strangled in her apartment, and she fell into a coma and died 4 days later.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those franchises that is cursed.
I don't know when the film came out. I don't know what time of year the film came out, maybe summer, but she died in November of the same year that Poltergeist came out. So pretty tragic. And And so anyway, what, you mentioned that Steven Spielberg went to the MPAA to get the PG-13 rating, but he and Tobe Hooper appealed the Poltergeist rating because it was given an R rating, and they went and argued that the scene that was sort of the controversial scene that gave it the R rating, which is the face peeling scene of one of the documentarians,
and
or ghost hunting,
really stands out.
Yeah, they said that this isn't real, this is a hallucination, and therefore doesn't meet the criteria.
That is some fancy footwork.
Yeah, and I mean, then it was granted the PG-13.
And that's the thing about watching this movie is that scene really, really stands out from the rest of the movie because it is the one moment of like visceral gore. Oh man, I'll never forget it. It fucked me up when I was a kid when I first watched it.
Yeah, I think one of the things is it introduced everybody of that era to the concept of paranormal research, and Beatrice Straight, the actress, played Dr. Tesh, who came in with her team of investigators, and they used cameras, microphones, and scientific equipment to actually pick up on spiritual entities. And it really launched a generation of, or multi-generation of, ghost hunting.
Oh, yeah.
Shows, and
there was
all that interest around this. There are like reality shows, and everything is about ghost hunting now.
That was kind of the cool thing about the movie is they had science, they had mysticism, side by side working on this problem, and it was kind of cool. Like they clashed for sure, but it was, you're right, like the whole era of like setting up cameras and audio recording equipment in rooms, and then like listening back for whispers.
Yeah. And I don't know if you mentioned Zelda Rubinstein, but she, played basically a mystic who exorcised this demon.
She is amazing.
Yeah. If you ever wonder, she's 4'3" tall, and she had a deficiency of her pituitary gland, which prevented her from being fully grown.
Now, Tangina is
her name.
Yeah.
She's a medium.
She is the one of the few characters to show up in all three movies of the original Poltergeist franchise, and she's in lots of cool shit. I think it was her last movie ever. Zelda Rubinstein it's an excellent found footage mockumentary called Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon. I totally recommend it. It's a really good movie.
And I think what stuck with me, I remember seeing this as a double feature with Close Encounters at the drive-in theater.
Yeah.
And it's really horror in your backyard. It's something that could happen anywhere. It really was that fear of what happens behind like the white picket fence of a house.
That's what I like about it too, is that it
in a
really,
very like cookie cutter neighborhood.
Also let's just say it out loud.
Suburb.
In a very white, affluent, NIMBY, yuppie neighborhood in the 80s. This is basically like a closed community, and fucking horrible shit happens there.
Because it does.
It brought the horror home to a place that, quote unquote, it can't happen here. So I think that was really effective for a lot of American families at the time. Like, wow, this could happen to our perfect family in our perfect home.
Well, if you think about what everything was happening with kids being kidnapped, like the height of the 80s, and child molesting,
satanic panic,
all that stuff. This is a psychological horror about what happens behind like the doors of a common home. And
essentially the villain of the film is greed.
Yeah.
Just good old capitalist 80s greed.
And, the fact that we stole lands.
Yeah.
white people stole lands and didn't care about what grounds are consecrated.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that pool
Definitely.
scene is
Oh, God.
horrifying.
I know. All I could ever think about is, oh, her mouth is open.
Yeah. Oh, God, all that mud in
All
there.
the body
Yeah.
water.
And
There's nothing
also-
worse than soggy body water.
Also, what's interesting, too, is
Brackish.
the TV in the home
Yeah.
commentary.
Oh yeah, it's cool watching now because it's like one of those big ass tube TVs
Yeah.
with the big dial that
Right.
only had really 4 slots on it. I remember those, and there's a scene in the movie where they play the national anthem to an American flag, and then the TV just goes off the air.
That's what used to happen,
yeah,
everyone.
literally, they'd run out of programming, and it would just turn to fucking static for the rest of the night.
Yeah.
Imagine
Until like
Yeah.
5 or 6 a.m. when the morning news would come on.
there was an attitude at some point that existed where it
was
wasn't
like,
we
it's
have
time
to
go to bed now.
we don't have to fill every single second of every single moment with content. By the way, speaking of content, welcome to our podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Fill it up.
You
Download
should
us again.
Be watching and listening and reading and all this.
Do you want to talk about yours or should we
I
take a break?
do. No, let's talk about mine first and then let's take a break. I'm going to start first off with it's the most recent one on my list. It's 2016's Lights Out. Now, this was the directorial debut of David F. Sandberg, who's recently gone on to direct Shazam, for what that's worth. So this is different. Now, I'm going to get it out of the way. It's essentially an unofficial remake of a 90s film called Darkness Falls. I don't know if you've seen that one. It's okay. It's got a great premise, but it was sort of let down by some really rough acting and effects. But the thing about Lights Out, it's not necessarily like an original premise. It's just done really, really well. Now, this is starring Teresa Palmer from Warm Bodies and Gabriel Bateman from Annabelle as brother and sister, whose father, played by Billy Burke, who is in lots of stuff, but he's probably best known as the Rocketeer himself. So their father's murdered, and their mother, who's played by the always awesome Maria Bello, suffers from severe mental illness. She has, depression. She has severe phobias and a delusion, quote unquote, about a woman named Diana that stalks her, that she claims murdered her husband, and that you can only see in the dark. I know that's kind of a contradiction, but basically, if you have the lights on, you can't see Diana, but you're safe from her. In any dark place, that's when she becomes visible and she can get you. So the movie becomes basically stay out of the shadows kind of thing. Like, you really only need a tiny bit of darkness for this thing to fucking get you. And it is a very, very tight film. I think it's only like an hour and 20 minutes long. It's really... It's not, like I said, it doesn't reinvent the wheel. It just hones it. It's
Right.
It's a very tense movie. It's got, revolving around this kind of simple but really effective premise of don't go into the darkness. And
Which, it stars a kid who, it's afraid of the dark. That's a common childhood fear.
That's true. Yeah.
So why do you need an R rating when that fear already exists? And let's exploit that with this entity only comes out in the dark.
That's the reason why
there is a reason to be afraid of the dark, and here it is.
The reason why this movie works so well, and I think it can pull off a PG-13 without losing any of its scares is because the scariest stuff happens in darkness. So you don't really see it happening. You hear it, certainly, and the implication is very, very, very much there. And that is terrifying. What is scarier, to see something quickly happen or to hear screaming from the darkness and knowing that, whatever's happening to make someone scream that way is coming for you next.
Right.
So that's essentially this movie. And, I just want to say, watch out for Dirty Diana. She's no, let me be.
That is not how that song goes at all.
Dirty Diana, no. Yeah, sort of.
Yeah.
I mean, Anyway, Lights Out. I really like this movie. Like I said, it's a quick bite.
Yeah.
It's really effective and it's really fun, and because it's PG-13 and it's not gory, bring the youngins to this one. This is the whole family can watch this, honestly. And Maria Bello really knocks it out of the park. There's a lot of
She always does. She's really good.
There's a lot of emphasis on the stigmatization of people with depression in this movie because, she's right the whole fucking time, and that's vindicated when her children finally start believing her. But, this movie revolves for a long time around the conflict between the daughter and the mom. The daughter does not believe the mother until, she does.
She sees it for
yeah,
herself.
Basically. So,
and sometimes that has to happen.
It is, Maria Bello usually plays very strong, badass, like kick-ass characters. And in this movie, she's very emotionally vulnerable and not weak, but she's, not believed. She's desperate to be believed. She's in that state of, she knows the truth and nobody will listen to her. And she does it really, really well. So yeah, Lights Out. Check it out.
Absolutely.
With the lights on.
So let's turn the lights out and take a quick break.
Ah! The world's a scary place. It only makes sense you'd want to keep your loved ones safe by slowly poisoning them just above the threshold of death. But the tricky part has always been finding the right dosage. You want to keep your precious darlings weak enough to need you, but not so weak you can't have a social life too. Don't get me started on overdoses. What a mess. Well, to all you concerned moms and totally normal boyfriends out there, have I got a wonderful product for you. Introducing Munchausen by Proxybox, a home meal delivery kit guaranteed to keep your charges physically weak enough to never escape your loving home fortress. Each Munchausen by Proxybox comes with a delicious pre-planned meal designed by our team of sarin gastronomers to delight the taste buds and crush the human spirit. Choose from an assortment of meals, from our classic chicken a la strychnine to our gluten-free pesticide platter. Don't take a chance that your loved ones will venture out into the world and get hurt, or worse, decide they don't need you anymore. Keep them close and compliant, without the hassle or worry of looky-loos at the grocery store. Order Munchausen by Proxybox today and get a free window sealing kit that neighbors won't notice. This is a fake ad for a fake product on a horror-themed podcast. We do not condone nor endorse poisoning people because you are literally unlovable.
So mine's a twofer. My next one is a twofer. I combine these because they're both American remakes of the Japanese originals.
Ah.
The Ring, 2002, and The Grudge, 2004. Believe it or not, these are both PG-13 rated.
I only remembered later after you told me that The Ring is PG-13.
Yeah.
Because holy shit.
I know.
It
They're
is
so scary.
It's unbelievably. Actually, as a side note, I have a younger coworker who recently came in saying, hey, have any of you ever seen this movie, The Ring? And she's like talking about how it was the scariest movie she's ever seen, and I'm like, that's great.
Yeah.
I love it. Yes, come to the the horror table.
So The Ring is
It's horrible.
Adapted from the Japanese film Ringu, and it's
What does that mean?
The Ring.
Oh.
Gore Verbinski directs the American remake, and it stars Naomi Watts. And what the overall plot of this is a cursed videotape makes its way into the home of a teenager. And Naomi Watts plays Rachel, who is a journalist, and she basically starts investigating the origins and what's going on with this tape. You receive a phone call 7 days after watching the tape, you receive a phone call after watching the tape, and then you have 7 days to live. So there is a concept of what Naomi Watts is after, which is how do I outsmart this death sentence, essentially. And if you watch the original Ringu, it is, I would say, a pretty good adaptation.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty honest adaptation. They're both scary. I think that the American version is definitely more accessible for Western audiences. But it is equally as scary with the girl from the well.
Yeah.
Sadako. Yeah.
I don't remember
Her
what
name
she's
isn't
called.
Sadako
It's Sadako in the Japanese version.
Yes.
Yeah.
And originally it's based on
Samara.
a series of books.
It's Samara.
Yeah. This Ringu is based on a series of books, an urban legend. So, as we mentioned in our international episodes, there is a lot of folklore and mystery around urban legend that the Japanese make their films about. So, like we do, we took it and made it our own. But it's a really good one.
Well, what do you think makes this one work so well with the PG-13 rating?
Because it doesn't need any violence or real horror. I mean, there's nothing that really happens that's too bloody or, violent.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see the violence. You don't know where it's coming from. It's really just using like a videotape, a television, a telephone. And that's how those are the devices that are essentially the killing.
Yeah,
part.
like the original movie, you don't see anyone die necessarily. You see them afterwards with like a horrible look on their face.
Yeah, like a total fear. And we eventually see Samara coming out of the television, which is an incredible filmatic moment.
Yeah, the way they actually did that had the actor do everything backwards.
Yeah.
And then they filmed it in reverse and then played it back the other way. So it describes like that's the herky-jerky movements. It's kind of the same way that like David Lynch did things in the Black Lodge in Twin Peaks.
Right. Why this is so scary is you don't know how to outrun it, and you don't know what they're seeing until you see it for yourself. So this fear on the faces of people that die, you don't know what is on the tape. And so that curiosity as the viewer is really enticing. The curiosity that gets everybody essentially by watching the videotape. It's our natural curiosity.
Yeah, I think a common theme we're seeing in our recommendations and in what makes a really effective PG-13 horror movie is implication.
Yeah. And, sometimes fear of something that isn't recognizable or can't be named or can't be understood right away. The Grudge is another Hollywood adaptation of a Japanese original directed by Takashi Shimizu.
Yeah.
Both the Japanese and the American version.
Can I actually add to that trivia?
And the original title is called Ju-on.
It began as a made-for-TV movie that he directed. Then he turned it into a feature film called Ju-on in Japan. Then he remade it in America as The Grudge. So he did the same movie 3 times.
Right.
And then a bunch of sequels, too.
And it's starring Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Who's that?
And it follows a family who makes a new life in Tokyo. So this is interesting because it's an American film, but it takes place in Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
And the house is prone to hauntings that they move in. And they become terrorized in the film by, it's psychologically horrifying. And it's graphic and scary. And it definitely, I think, is one of the films that pushes that MPAA rating of PG-13.
Oh, yeah, for sure. This is one that really seems to be like, oh, you just made it, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's scary as hell. I prefer the original, but the remake itself is also very, very good.
But it's still this like haunted thing that you don't really know what it is or where it comes from. It's terrorizing the people that are involved. And it's really a race to see how you can outrun it or
That's the thing
live from it or survive from it.
I really like about the Ju-on and the Grudge movies is the sense of, well, they kind of even say it, like, once you enter the cursed home, you're fucked. That's it. You're done.
That's it.
You can live another week or whatever and struggle and try to fight it, but there's this really pressing sense of, oh, that's it. You are a dead man walking.
Unlike Poltergeist, you can't just leave the house.
Yeah. Or get some tiny Southern woman to, like, pull your kid out of the hell zone.
Or tiny Japanese woman.
Yeah. That's awesome. My next one is it's actually it's from 2001. It's a Spanish-American co-production, and it is The Others, directed by Alejandro Amenabar, who...
We come here for magic.
Somehow heartbreak feels good in a place like this.
Somehow children's ghosts feel great in a place like this.
Yes. So I'm going to actually get into that in a second, but I do want to talk for a second
It stars Nicole Kidman, people. That's what we're going up against here.
So about Alejandro Amenabar, he is a virtuoso director. He has directed movies such as Abre los Ojos, Tesis, The Sea Inside, which is not a horror movie, but a beautiful, very, very sad movie with Javier Bardem. I definitely recommend watching Abre los Ojos and Tesis. They are fantastic thrillers and weird and great. But anyway, The Others. So Amenabar directed this. It's an English language film. It was the first English language film to be nominated for Best Picture at the Goyas, which is Spain's Academy Awards. Now, I'm going to say it, this is the scariest movie that I am talking about today. It is a beautiful, sumptuous, luxurious period movie set in England in the 1940s.
Takes place on this really amazing estate.
It takes place exclusively on this estate and a little bit of the grounds that you really can't see because it's always shrouded in mist. Now, Nicole Kidman plays a mother who is awaiting the return of her husband, played by Christopher Eccleston, who is off to war in World War II. Now, she plays the mother of two children who are severely allergic to the sun, so they can never, ever leave the house, ever. They also can't have open windows or anything like that. Now, a new nanny and her husband, sort of like groundskeeper, move in and help out, and they're weird. They say weird things. They seem to know things they shouldn't know. And after they get there, the kids start acting kind of weird. So they start talking about the others, which are apparitions that are, haunting the children and all these other things. So this movie is classic Gothic horror.
And everybody is so pale, especially the kids.
God, yeah.
They look like ghosts.
Nicole
Kidman is pale.
Yeah.
But the kids especially look like creepy ghosts because they're allergic to the sun
and never go out. Yeah, but they're also very wealthy, so they're kind of like that foppish Edwardian sort of look.
Yeah, like they look like they're frozen in time children.
Like tuberculosis kids or something. But so Nicole Kidman is the perfect casting in this film because I'm just going to lay it out there. She has a very ethereal, kind of strange quality to her. She's weird. The way she claps and her strange roving accent that kind of goes between Australian and miscellaneous in the same sentence. She's just an interesting person.
It's a laugh.
She's like 7 feet tall and
cry.
Very beautiful, but not what I would call like, I don't know. There's a definitely a coldness to her, and she always is the best in roles when she really leans into that. And this is a great role for her, and she absolutely slays it. She plays a haggard, like on the edge woman, and I mean emotionally haggard because she's wealthy and beautiful in this movie.
She tried to convince the director not to cast her because she was coming right off of Moulin Rouge and did not want to go to that dark of a place.
Fascinating.
But she was convinced ultimately to do it.
I'm glad she did because she's fantastic in this movie. This movie really is anchored by the incredible direction and the performances. Now, the thing is, when I say classic gothic horror movie, it really is that. It's things right in the corner of your eye. It's weird bumps in the night, that kind of stuff. It's haunted house, but as directed by a masterful director at his best.
And much like going to the movies now, this movie starts with a voiceover of Nicole Kidman reading a story to you. Being like, are you sitting comfortably?
Yeah.
Listen to mother. Heartbreak feels good in a place like this.
It's definitely got like a turn of the screw Henry James vibe to it. Now, I understand this movie came out in 2001, so it has been out there for a long time, but I'm still not going to spoil the ending because, wow.
Yeah, it's really a great payoff and
incredible mindfuck. Once you figure out what and who the others are, I will say none of it is left ambiguous. They do wrap this up. It's just, damn, it's awesome. And Nicole Kidman has a wonderful little turn right at the end of the movie where it's just, she's just really, when cast in the right role, she sort of graduated.
She's
yeah,
dynamite.
She's really, really so good. And she's so good in this movie because she's ostensibly the protagonist of the film, but I wouldn't call her a great person or even a really great mom. She is trying. She's up against forces that are really beyond her understanding. But she plays this sort of like on the edge of falling apart at any moment,
which I feel like
really
is
well.
Very good. She really does that role well.
Yeah,
she's played that role in a few other things.
Yes.
Alejandro Amenabar.
Yes.
He also composed and orchestrated all the music for
this film. He did. Yes.
And this film is the last time that Nicole Kidman and then husband Tom Cruise collaborated, as he was an executive producer of this film.
Still not the scariest movie they made together, which I would say is Eyes Wide Shut.
And their divorce was finalized the same week this film came out.
Yikes.
So heartbreak really does feel good in a place like this.
Don't feel bad. I think both of them are doing just fine. So the others, out of the three movies I'm recommending today, it is, I will say, the scariest. Absolutely. It's the one that will stay with you the longest.
It definitely isn't bloody violent.
No, not even a little bit. It's
like,
very classic. You can listen. You can watch this with your parents. Honestly, roll out your dusty old mom and dad and sit them down for a movie that everyone can enjoy.
Well, we're talking PG-13, so if a 13-year-old has a parent right now, they're not going to be dusty and old.
If a 13-year-old is listening to this podcast, then I don't really know what to tell them. It doesn't get better. So anyway. Check out the others. It's really, it's the highest quality and like most cinematic movie that I'm recommending today. But don't let that deter you because it is absolutely terrifying.
My next is another twofer. You see
Jesus
how I'm
Christ.
squeezing this in?
Yeah.
Insidious 1 and 2. Insidious 1 came out in 2010 and part 2 came out in 2013, and they are both created by James Wan. He created the franchise after Saw but before The Conjuring. Patrick Wilson and Rose Byrne star as terrified parents of a child who's possessed by evil spirits. And again, it's another haunted house horror, which is interesting because we're going to do an episode for our Terror Fest series.
Yay! The return
about
of
haunted
Octerra
houses,
Fest.
and I feel like we are talking a lot about haunted houses.
Well, I will, at the end of the episode, I kind of want to do a little wrap up of some commonalities I've been noticing in our recommendations about maybe the elements that go into a successful and effective PG-13 horror movie.
I mean, I would say that Insidious is originally like a haunted house, but it really turns into way more than that.
Oh, yeah.
Like a historical, supernatural, like familial, generational
It's
horror.
got demons. It's got an extra dimensional zone.
And it essentially tells the story of the Lambert family, again, settling into their new house. Weird things happen. And their son Dalton falls into a coma, and then Rose Byrne starts to see things, and they're basically encountering all this strangeness. And then the mother-in-law, Patrick Wilson's mom, played by the amazing, always frightening when she wants to be, Barbara Hershey,
the queen herself.
She comes and moves in. She hires a medium played by Lynn Shay.
Oh yeah, another one. Listen, I am
incredible.
fucking here for women having these resurgences in their careers, in the third act. Just yes, fucking awesome to see Barbara Hershey and Lynn Shay getting work and substantive work that they're crushing.
So essentially, what they find out is the house isn't haunted. It's Dalton. He's in the further.
Yeah,
and Patrick Wilson has to go into the further to rescue him.
He basically has a haunted kid.
Yeah. And so then the Lamberts come back for part 2, double the scares, brings back all the cast.
And Darth Maul the demon.
And it goes further into the further. I know there's more Insidious movies coming out. It
just came out this year.
I'm not going to speak to those. I'm just talking about these two.
Yeah.
I am surprised. Again, it's sort of like all of the movies we've talked about. This is definitely on the line of, is this appropriate for a 13 or 14 or 15-year-old to watch?
I think that's a question.
Is very scary, but ultimately it's about parents doing whatever it takes. And I think that's one of the common themes that we can talk about later. Parents doing whatever it takes to really make sure that their children are okay.
Yeah.
So far, I think most of the films that we talked about, that parent-child theme
Well, there are
running
kids
throughout.
In a lot of the movies we're talking about because these movies are supposed to be reaching an audience that includes children. So you're going to find kid actors in a lot of these movies because what kid wants to see a movie with all old people in it?
Yeah, but there's not like really parents being the baddies here.
Yeah.
So far, anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know what your last
we don't have any Nightmare on Elm Street parents.
Yeah. I don't know what your last one is.
I love that Nightmare on Elm Street parents is our go-to archetype for shitty 80s parenting. Because, man, they were the worst. Love you, John Saxon, but my God, you were such a bad dad in that movie. So my last one...
Freddie was a better dad.
Now, my last one is the most fun.
My last one is the most fun, too.
It's also the one you're most likely to go, seriously? That's PG-13? It's 2009's Drag Me to Hell, directed by Sam Raimi. Yes, it is PG-13. This one must have just fucking snuck under the wire with the ratings board. I don't even know how he did it. Maybe he just set the bar so high with Evil Dead that anything other than dumping an aquarium pool sized bucket of blood on somebody is PG-13 for him.
It's not about a haunted house.
No.
It is not about parents
but
doing
it is
whatever
about a
they
curse.
can to take care of their children.
It is about a curse, though.
It is.
So Alison Lohman, who is absolutely fantastic in this movie, and I would love to see her do more horror. Now,
she was in White Oleander, which was sort of like her breakout role.
Yes.
I know that she's still doing lots of things.
Now, she plays a young bank clerk at the beginning of her career, and she's kind of forced by her shitty boss to deny a mortgage or a loan, something, to a Romani witch. of
don't do that.
incredible power, which, yeah, don't do that. Now, the witch curses her with a lamia, which we meet actually at the beginning of the movie in a flashback. Now, in ancient Greek mythology, lamia was one of Zeus's booty calls. And like all of Zeus's booty calls, things went really, really well for lamia. No, just kidding. Hera found out, went insanely jealous as Hera did, took away all of Lamia's children and her ability to sleep, which drove Lamia insane. So she went around eating children. And then eventually turned into a horrible, hideous monster resembling what she was doing. Seriously, just do not have sex with Zeus. Don't. There is no divine dick.
Sometimes you don't have a choice.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, come on.
He does
rape a lot of people.
Yeah. But,
and things,
you want to get turned into a cow? Fine. Ask Europa how well that worked out for her. So anyway, this movie...
Did you mention John Paxton?
John Saxon.
Oh, John Paxton is in this film.
Yes. So also in this movie is Justin Long, who, yeah.
Problematic.
Who fucking isn't anymore? So anyway.
Octavia Spencer is also in this film.
Yes.
Just briefly.
Lots of good shit. So I love this movie. It is classic Raimi. Now, Raimi had come off a few years of doing some very un-Raimi-like films. And, he does that. He basically works for Disney now. So this was like the first horror movie he had done in a long time. And sadly, it is the last horror movie he did. I'm not counting Doctor Strange 2 because that wasn't a horror movie.
Well, horrible.
It wasn't very good.
He actually offered Edgar Wright to direct this, but Edgar Wright turned it down because he was filming Hot Fuzz.
That worked out well in all ways because
Absolutely.
Hot Fuzz is maybe one of my favorite comedies of all time.
And Elliot Page was actually originally cast for the role of Christine, but dropped out of the project due to the old SAG strike related scheduling issues.
Oh, also for the best because, as I said, Alison Lohman murders this role.
Yes.
She's incredible. So anyway, she gets possessed by a lamia, which is this horrible monster that is kind of like The Ring. It's coming for her in a few days.
No matter what she does.
Yeah. So she's cursed.
3 days.
She's definitely gonna die. So the movie essentially follows her as she desperately tries to break this curse while keeping it, kind of hidden. Her boyfriend doesn't believe her at all. Justin Long doesn't play a bad guy in this movie, but he definitely plays a Justin Long in this movie. Kind of a dick, which he is so very good at, and I guess now we know why. So, also the scene with the cat, that's all I'm going to say. Mm-hmm. It's classic. So, Alison Lohman does such a good job of playing a quote-unquote normal person who, as the ticking time it starts to expire and her options run out, resorts to more and more drastic and morally questionable methods to rid herself of this impending horrible death. And honestly, it's hard to blame her.
Yeah.
It becomes a very interesting character study of what a regular person will do to stay alive.
And also she didn't do anything. She really didn't deserve.
Well, you can choose who
curse.
you work for. You can choose what you do for a living. These days...
I understand that, but she was just doing her job in the moment.
Sure. But you don't, ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to work for Goldman Sachs. You just don't. You don't have to. So anyway, this movie, like I said, it's very classic Raimi. It's got all the Raimi elements. It's got zooms into close-ups. It's got possessed animals that do weird things. It's got a
mud.
Great, ironic banger of an ending. Now, I said Lamia is a Greek, from Greek mythology. This movie has a wonderful Grecian twist at the end, very ironic. And
the poster is scary, and I'm surprised it even got a PG-13.
I am too, because it is scary. There is some violence. This is definitely the movie on my list that skirts the line the closest. And I'm just going to say, Sam, when you're ready for another horror movie, we are too. And if you're listening, and I know you are, Tim Burton, we miss you. Come back to us.
Interesting.
You don't have to keep working for Disney. You can do something else now.
So my last is my favorite and funnest, as it is a horror comedy, which we've talked about on our horror comedy episode, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. But it's Happy Death Day from 2017, directed by Christopher Landon, who also did Freaky and 13 Going on 30.
And will be directing the upcoming Scream 7.
Yes, absolutely. So it's a Groundhog Day-esque movie. It's not an upbeat Groundhog Day. It's a nightmare of it.
Listen, if you're anything like me, you watched Groundhog Day and said, yeah, but what if there was more murder?
Yeah. Well, it follows the character of Tree, played by Jessica Roth. She wakes up every day after being murdered in a variety of different ways by a masked killer called Babyface.
Yeah. With a great mask.
Yeah. And part of the horror, and why this is a horror film, is the inevitability of her numerous demises.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a slasher.
Her trying to figure it out, her trying clever ways of escaping, but it ends the same way pretty much every night with her dying.
Yeah.
A terribly gruesome death.
Like, you remember that stretch of Groundhog Day where Bill Murray basically just goes, fuck it?
Yeah.
And it's like a whole montage.
And there's no consequences.
That's the whole
next day.
movie.
Yeah, it's great.
Imagine that being like, for like 2 hours.
And the killer is somewhere, but you don't really know where as the audience. You don't know when Babyface is going to pop up. So there's a lot of good jump scares. And then it's not overdone. And Jessica Roth is really charming.
It's like a
really
born to
hilarious.
Play this role moment. Yeah.
And there's really not a lot, the film goes all in on some of the scares and the aspect of the slasher of it all, but there's not a ton of gore or torture or anything like that,
and
which is why it still
you don't miss
fits
it
in the PG-13. No, the kills are pretty subdued, but they're still scary because you are trying to outrun this with her.
And one part I really, really want to stress is
and it's
this
her
movie's
birthday,
hilarious,
which is why it's called Happy Death Day.
Yeah.
Because she wakes up every day on her birthday having just been murdered.
The movie is really, really funny. Jessica Roth is amazing. The moment when she like basically is fed up with it, when she like loses her patience, is amazing.
Even just talking about, Drag Me to Hell and Happy Death Day, it really makes me just want to rewatch both of those.
They are great. Now, quick shout out to Happy Death Day 2, which takes a hard pivot into science fiction and is also a lot of fun. Christopher Landon made some hints recently that he was working on a crossover between Freaky and Happy Death Day.
Yeah, and don't sleep on Freaky.
Yeah, so Catherine Newton and Jessica Roth kind of together in the same movie.
Amazing.
That would be I would watch that for sure because Catherine Newton was so good in Freaky. He's really good at finding young, strong female leads.
Yeah.
For his work.
Good. They were great.
That's going to be great for Scream 7.
And like I said, this film doesn't work as well without the charm of the main character and just her, I don't know, savvy, smart alecky approach to figuring this shit out.
Now, the common element of all PG-13 horror movies is they start, I think, inherently with a handicap that they have to overcome, is they have more to prove. They have to
scare you without the common techniques of a R-rated movie. Right
at the beginning, it's kind of like the difference between writing a poem in free verse and writing a poem in a very rigid structure, like a villanelle or a sestina. I know you like those.
I do.
Right out of the gate, certain tools are taken away from you, rules are put in place, and boundaries are put in place, and you are told you can tell the story within this space. You cannot go out of this space. And one might argue that is limiting. I would argue in the right hands with the right story, it is invigorating.
Well, fear affects everybody of every age.
Yes.
So it doesn't have a criteria built into it. If you're afraid of something, it doesn't have anything to do with violence or sex or swearing.
That's the thing.
Or blood.
You can
be afraid of spiders.
This is wonderful gateway. You know, you have a niece or nephew whose parents never let them have any fun. Go take them to see one of these movies.
Yeah, there's this, I don't know, is it like a Vine or a meme or a TikTok of this little girl who rides around with her dolly in the basket of her tricycle or her bike with training wheels. She's probably 5 or 6. She
loves this doll.
And it's a Chucky doll.
It's straight up Chucky.
And it is scary Chucky doll.
Yeah, it's the one with like where after Bride of Chucky, where his face is all stitched
and
up
his hair is
up.
all crazy.
Yeah.
And she loves that doll so much.
She treats it like a Cabbage Patch Kid.
And I think sometimes some kids really do like to be scared.
I did. I mean, I love it. It's wonderful to, like I said, when you put limits, when you put these sort of rules on things, it forces you to rise to the occasion, to scare without using revulsion or disgust or, you know, what, I don't know if I would call them cheap tricks, but it does force you to get, like, it can be.
The Saw movies and Hostel.
Oh, yeah.
You know, those violent, bloody, over, like, gratuitous, those aren't scary to me. Those are just, like, disgusting.
Yeah, I love a good gory movie, but if all you're doing is just trying to impress me with, like, what you can get away with, I'm not interested. It needs to serve the story. Now, real quick, couple movies that absolutely deserve a mention. You mentioned briefly The Sixth Sense. Shyamalan is the king of this. Split for sure. That was the other one I wanted to give a quick shout out to. A Quiet Place 1 and 2.
Yep, absolutely.
Amazing.
Great.
Scary. Just the right amount of violence.
Parents doing whatever it takes to protect their children.
Yeah. And it does subvert some of the tropes. It's not a spiritual movie. It's not a haunted, cursed movie. It's a straight up alien invasion.
Movie.
Yeah. But I think what we're seeing in a commonality, we're seeing a lot of scares that are... These are movies that seem to give the audience a lot of faith. These are filmmakers saying, I trust you to scare yourself if I set you up for it.
Right.
You know,
I'm going to let your imagination run a little more wild here.
Yes. I'm not going to take you by the hand and show you what you should be afraid of. I'm going to set the scene and allow your lizard brain to just go bananas.
Yeah.
Because we are all basically just walking amygdalas misfiring randomly. So that's the beauty of a PG-13 movie. And yeah, there is something kind of nice about having a movie you can watch with a group of different people. You know, like maybe there is that one friend who's like, I'm not really into horror movies. You say, well, if I got one for you, because I know you really love watching period films and I know you like suspense, so let's go watch the others. You know?
Absolutely.
PG-13!
So check these out or others that we mentioned.
Just don't bring 12-year-olds.
And just remember...
They turn into evil gremlins if you do.
The Terror in Tandem podcast. Horror feels good in a place like this.
Sponsored by Nicole Kidman.
Bye, everyone.
Terror in Tandem is written, produced, and recorded by Laura and Richard Mathiasen, and edited and mixed by Richard Mathiasen. Our theme was written and performed by Carrie Denver, and all other music was written and performed by David Suspanic. All opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and should be taken as such. Thanks for listening, and please remember to give us a like, a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. We're standing right behind you.